Science, the supernatural, biblical prophecy, global events that threaten to rattle the very foundation of human existence. Critical examinations of the most important issues facing today's modern world. Welcome to the Sharpening Report. And now, your host, Josh Peck.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I'm your host, Josh Peck. So here we are at episode 100. What an interesting journey it has been. For those of you in the Sharpening Report Facebook group, I told you that I was going to leave the 100th episode as a surprise, though by now you've more than likely read the title, so the surprise is over. Tonight we have two amazing guests, one who is a returning guest, and who actually has made more appearances on the Sharpening Report than any other guest. And the other guest, who is brand new to the Sharpening Report, but who I've had many people suggesting to me as a guest for quite a while now. So without further ado, two men who need no introduction. We have returning guest S. Douglas Woodward, author of such books as Lying Wonders of the Red Planet and Uncommon Sense, and Anthony Patch, seasoned CERN researcher who has been making massive waves in the field. No pun originally intended. Going back and reading that again, there's like 3 quantum physics puns in there. But anyway, so all right, Anthony, Doug, welcome to the show. How are you both doing?
Hey, I'm good. I'm fighting a cough, so occasionally I'll mute my microphone and cough, and if you see me coughing, but don't hear me coughing, you'll know it's because I'm trying to spare your ears. But it's great to be with you, Josh. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and great. Thank you, and congratulations on 100 episodes. That's quite an accomplishment.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And for the audience, I want to make mention of this. Anthony, we had actually planned on recording this a few days ago, but we were having some technical difficulties with the internet and things. So Anthony reached out to his good friend Clyde Lewis from Ground Zero, and he was nice enough to offer his office to Anthony for this show. So I want to extend a personal thank you to Clyde Lewis and to all in the audience who aren't familiar. The show, he's the host of the show Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, and the website is groundzeromedia.org. It's a fantastic show, lots of really good content, good discussion. Any fan of this show, I think, will really like that show. So a big thank you goes out to Clyde for making this 100th episode happen. I greatly appreciative.
Good team effort.
Absolutely. Well, Anthony, we have a tradition on the Sharpening Report for all first-time guests, and since this is your first time, before we jump into all these amazing topics that we have lined up, oh, and I should mention, too, for the audience, Anthony has been suggested many times as a guest, but also what's been suggested is that we try doing a roundtable type of discussion, and people have come up, with that on various topics and stuff. But so we kind of talked about it last time we tried to record and figured that would be a good way to handle it, and also because I couldn't really do viewer questions without revealing who the guest is. So for those who follow me on Facebook, a while ago I put a post that said, for a future project, if you had any questions about quantum physics or CERN or prophecy or anything like that, what would you want to ask? And I figured that would cover it. And the cool thing is, Anthony, that a lot of people even had questions specifically for you. They're like, hey, if you ever talk to him, can you ask Anthony? So that worked out perfect. So we have all those questions. But as is tradition on the Sharpening Report, can you give us a rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, how that led to all the amazing work that you do today?
Well, I'm 62 now. When I was 16, I answered the call to the Lord. I've walked with Him since then. We've had our ups and downs, of course, as we all do in our life, but I've been researching as a Christian through those, what I call the glasses or the lens of the Holy Spirit. Been researching CERN for about 25 years, and in the last 5 to 6 years with some increased intensity. Again, borrowing the pun that you threw out earlier, but yeah, CERN has really captivated my attention in the hobby world of physics. I like to cover physics and philosophy, science in general, religion in general. I'm not a preacher, but I think the best way to sum up what I do is I really try to translate the arcane science, whether it be physics or DNA, biology, whatever, to a manageable framework that people can wrap their heads around. And I would consider myself more of an intuitive researcher into the areas of science than a classically trained physicist, for example. But I do have years and years of study to where I think I can handle the translation, but not necessarily the mathematics of it all.
That's funny. That's exactly how I am with it too. The math I can't wrap my head around, but like my kind of philosophy on the math is because some people say, well, how can you trust what they say if you don't understand the math behind it? Well, 2 + 2 is still 4 whether you're a Christian or an atheist. So
right.
I just
right. The mathematics is just a language, and it's really a way to explain in shorthand what the theory that is being postulated. And so, for example, Einstein, he was an intuitive scientist, and he would work through his idea, including the equations in his mind, and then he would go to pen and paper or to the chalkboard and write out the actual equations that represented what he understood intuitively. Now, we're not, you and I, applying the mathematics, but I think we're following in much the same footsteps that Einstein did in terms of methodology. But my testimony is, I'm doing this not for me. I'm simply a witness. I'm simply following his prompting that he really hit me hard about 5 years ago, and then it's been almost 4 years now, he really put it on my heart to start writing. And I had never even attempted to write a book before. Now I have 2 and a third in the works. But it isn't me. I'm just following what he leads me to, the rabbit holes of research that I go through, and he has impressed upon me that CERN has become the focal point, but then, like the hub of a wheel, many areas of science radiate out from that center point, and that's why I tend to cover a broad, diverse area within the realm of science itself.
Absolutely. And you said you have a couple books out. Can you tell us a little bit about those and where people can find them if they're interested?
Yeah, thank you. They're available through my website. They're published by Paranoia Publishing, and I also write for Paranoia Magazine. The first book is Covert Catastrophe. That was released in 2013, and 2048 Diamonds in the Rough was released in 2014. The first book is in print right now. In about a month, the second book will be available in print. Again, that's through my website, but it's also through my publisher. The first book is really what I call a buffet of topics, topics that perhaps people have not encountered before, and I do that so that it will prompt them to do further research, independent research on their own, if they find something that's intriguing. Now, of course, it's a work of fiction. It's a fast-paced adventure story. It's a trilogy, and it's much along the lines of if anyone has read the Tom Clancy books, very much like that. But it's leading-edge technology that many people have never even heard of before, is presented in both books. And that's really the way that I have gone about it, is to put it in a framework, again, that people can understand, but will also prompt them to explore on their own.
That's really cool. That's how I handle my books too. I really appreciate that. And my 2 major books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, both I begin and end both of those books with the idea that basically, here's the research. Don't take my word for it. But if you're interested, go out and search more. You have the tools, and I as an author, I hope to provoke that in people too. So that's really cool. Now, usually for the audience, usually in episodes, I'll have a question list in front of me, and but this time it's a bit different. As I mentioned before, we decided to handle it more of like a discussion between the 3 of us. And Anthony sent in some great talking points, and we're going to go through those, and then we do have some viewer questions that we can get into a bit later too. But before we get all that, we can hit on these talking points. The first one is the status of the LHC and Earth changes, and then I added a little bit on there, the lead ions, PeV scale, new potential particle discovery that's just been recently released. So where should we start with this? Doug, Anthony, whoever, jump right in.
Well, it sounds like you've got some pretty advanced questions. I wonder if we should start with more basic stuff.
Yeah, hey, that's totally fine.
You might be losing me before we even begin. So
that's totally fine.
I had, and I think Anthony would be great because you guys are really more the experts than me. I've written a bit about this, having read a number of different authors, and I find it fascinating. But it's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I do have lots of questions. But I was thinking maybe we should just sort of talk, start off by just talking about, relativity, and, is the accepted science of the day really under suspicion that it might not be true? And maybe we could begin, and then how the Hadron Collider and all that, and the new particles and all that sort of either proves or disproves sort of the standard theory, Einsteinian physics and quantum mechanics and all that. We might kind of start with the basics. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's a really wise choice. I think that's a good way to start, because there are a lot of people who even might only have a general interest, have probably already come up against some of these other theories, not saying that they're wrong or anything like that, but some of these other theories that have a different interpretation of things like relativity and stuff like that. For me, I think some of the physics that they're doing at the LHC is constantly redefining what reality is anyway. So I'm open to a lot of those other ideas. But I'll let Anthony take the take this one.
Well, relativity, we think of Einstein again, and I think where you're headed with this, Douglas, is the three of us have talked about let's say, a competing theory, which is the electric universe, the model of the universe being comprised of electric plasma, and that the forces that are involved are electromagnetic forces, as opposed to perhaps talking about the gravity model. Einstein, in his theory of relativity, was focused upon gravity, the speed of light, of course, and trying to come up with a unified theory for the universe to explain all of the forces between energy, particles, waves, frequency, that type of thing, on top of his studies of light and how gravity affects light, in particular the bending of light as it moves through the vast distances of the universe. Sort of a competing theory, and I always like to cite my sources. I'm not a spokesperson for the Thunderbolts project, but the Thunderbolts project is a group of scientists, multidisciplinary gentlemen and ladies, who've put forth a thesis that I hold as a valid one, that the universe is comprised of this electric plasma, and that we see electromagnetic attractions and repulsions taking place between the planets. And this functions down at the quantum level as well as at the macro level throughout the universe. And we'll get into discussing that more, but most of the time when we hear things that are being presented from CERN about the Large Hadron Collider and particle physics, what they put out for public consumption is really the gravity-based model, and I'll define that more specifically as black holes, dark matter, and dark energy. Whereas the electric universe has a different explanation for that. And I'll cut off my answers. I'll just let you guys jump in.
Well, it's really interesting too. That's what leaves me open to these kinds of theories that are different from the gravity model, because there are even popular physicists today like Sean Carroll is a good one, or Joe Licken or Brian Greene, that they talk about how quantum field theory really says that everything is comprised of quantum fields of energy, that a particle is really nothing more than a spike in that energy, or a wave in that. Right. When we look at it, we see a particle, but the true reality is a wave of energy. To me, that seems like it would fit perfectly in with the idea of the electric universe. And interestingly enough, too, he wasn't a physicist that I know of, but the guy that built Coral Castle, Ed Leeds Scalman, he had some writings, and it was based on the electromagnetism and how they kind of work like corkscrews to attract together. And I thought that was fascinating. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yes. No, absolutely. I might throw out just kind of my starting point. A lot of this discussion for me begins with a book that was written back in the 1960s by Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier, which is called The Morning of the Magicians. And I don't know if Anthony, if you're familiar with that book or not, but it was written in 1960, and it was trying to explain what was really behind the Third Reich and Hitler and the occult and all of that. And the subtitle of the book is Secret Societies, Conspiracies, and Vanished Civilizations. What's interesting, and this will bear out as we talk, is that you see this interplay between physics, science, really ancient anthropology and archaeology, conspiracy theory, and all these things are sort of wrapped together, and they really are, as we get into the whole discussion of excuse me, of the Hadron Collider and what's going on in Geneva and so forth. And so
what was the title of that book again? I'm sorry.
It's called The Morning of the Magicians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm going to be fighting this cough, so I apologize again for it. But nevertheless, the real issue, the core issue, is the connection between science and spirituality, and so I think for me that is kind of a jumping off point. And I would just also throw out, Anthony, when you say the universe is sort of comprised of electric plasma, I think you're not attempting to become what we might call a reductionist, which means that all that is are little particles, atomists, or the electric plasma concept, meaning that excludes God. In other words, a materialist. Apologize. You're not arguing for that. You're just saying that in a material realm,
right,
that if one tries to understand the fundamental reality, we're not dealing with dark matter, sort of black holes, dark energy. We're dealing with some other substance that really is electromagnetic, and that really is that's kind of the point of departure, and where we should really understand how we should understand physics.
Exactly. So, yeah, very well summarized. I agree with that. There is the material world, and then there's the spiritual world, and I think that your book that you mentioned, The Morning of the Magicians, probably reflects what you and I, the three of us, have talked about before, and that's the fact that you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical. And yet, modern science does try to do exactly that. In the public venue, for public consumption, they'll speak of pure science and try to debunk or minimize any discussion of spirituality, the Creator, certainly God. And if you bring up the word occult, they all raise their hands and say, no, we're not doing any of that sort of stuff. This is pure science, pure research. And yet the three of us, we agree, and we have been digging into and revealing, sorry about the pun, but illuminating the occult practices that really do drive the pure science.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting how they try to separate spirituality, yet most of them have no problem with extra dimensions, and that's something, extra spatial dimensions. It's something that I've written about in my books as well, is that when you really look at the core of what extra spatial dimensions from a physics standpoint are, and what a spiritual creation would be from a biblical viewpoint, they're synonymous, and you can't separate them. No more that you can't separate, say, the z-axis from the x and the y. You can't separate a fourth axis or higher extra spatial dimensions. So there is a spiritual creation there, and physicists won't use those words, but for all intents and purposes, that's what they're studying, regardless what they may want to call it. And I think that brings up something interesting too, is the difference. And I've written about this and talked about it too, the difference between observation and interpretation, because I think this is what turns off a lot of Christians to science, especially things like quantum physics, is, some physicist will, for example, Sean Carroll, I brought him up before, and I don't know him personally, I've only had one really short email exchange with him, but I think he's a good author, good writer, and I've read a couple of his books, but he sometimes when it comes to God and spirituality, he'll use his own interpretations and then call the whole thing science. For example, he was talking about quantum field theory, and he said in a presentation, see, quantum field theory proves that there's no afterlife because there's no quantum field to take information anywhere. That's an interpretation. That's not a scientific observation. An observation.
You can't measure it and reproduce it.
Exactly. An observation, somebody could make the argument that quantum field theory in itself, quantum fields are a type of observation because we can see particles and things like that and how they interact and things. But to put an interpretation on there, that says that proves there's no afterlife, that's all it is an interpretation. I think when Christians hear things like that, they think the whole thing is science, when really, if we learn that we can separate the interpretations and throw those out and then just keep the science and even replace the interpretations with our own, I think quantum field theory, if true, would just prove God, but again, that's my interpretation.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, you sort of get the sense that that science, in some ways, it's its own worst enemy because it wants to deny that there is a spiritual realm, and yet it wants to sort of reinvoke the idea of multiple dimensions that we don't see, hear, taste. That there's no empirical way to know those dimensions, and yet then you sort of. I think it was Anthony Flew in his parable about the invisible gardener that basically, pointed out that, it's basically how is it any different for us to posit an invisible gardener than it is to posit God? And really, it isn't any. In other words, if you go in and start talking about these different dimensions, it's really the same thing as talking about spiritual reality. It's just a semantic question. But scientists use the language of science oftentimes to hide the fact that they don't want to admit any kind of spiritual reality, or they wish to deny the truth of spirituality. And so, and yet, to take it one step further, which might lead us really back to Anthony and back to the Hadron Collider and CERN and so forth, what science really would like to do is level the playing field and make all dimensions accessible to science so that we as human beings can manipulate all dimensions. And in fact, I guess I would throw out the idea that the scientists today in Geneva at CERN are really wizards and witches. That they're really just trying to learn how to manipulate these other dimensions that the wizards and the witches have been, the shamans and so forth have been manipulating at least in brief periods of time for the specially initiated for centuries, for millennia. And science is trying to do it in some kind of a predictable macro mega sense. So anyway, so I served that up, Anthony. It's a softball for you.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think the track that we're going down here is the fact that, as I have said many times, we in the modern times, we have lost many of the spiritual tools and the spiritual sensitivities that the ancients practiced and had as a capability or a set of skills that they were able to use to communicate with entities in another dimension, to gain information, to gain guidance even from other spiritual realms and spiritual entities. And many of the religions, many of the occult practices are very overt in presenting their philosophy that they are communicating with other entities. So this covers a broad spectrum of cultures and religions throughout recorded history. What's different in these times is that because of the lack of these skill sets to tap in a spiritual way with another dimension, they are trying to utilize technology on a vast scale to reach into another dimension. And as I'm going to kind of leap ahead a little bit here, but their goal, their purpose with the LHC, among many other applications of the machine, is to create what I call the freeway. They're trying to open a dimensional portal that is stable and has the throughput, if you will, to bring in vast numbers of spiritual entities into our realm. Now, some people like Stuart Swerdlow and some others will say they're trying to, as you pointed out, level the playing field or bring the dimensions on the same level or on par with one another, that they're trying to bring other dimensions into the same, let's say, frequency range or same dimension as ours, that all of them will be one and the same rather than having multiple layers or multiple dimensions. The point here is that they are trying to create a large macro scale form of communication with the other side, with another dimension or multiple dimensions, rather than just the small portals that do exist around the planet, where there are just individual and short-term connections to the other side. Now, to their information gathering, they are gathering information from the other side. We can talk about Tesla, we can talk about other scientists that have done the same. Many people want to say that there's reverse engineering of UFOs that leads to a lot of the technology. There's a whole spectrum that we can go into. But the way I like to congeal things down and make it, digestible for people, the LHC is Tesla. Virtually all of Tesla's hidden technologies that were stolen the last few days of his life are being manifest and reproduced and utilized at CERN today. And going back to the electric universe, the plasma, the tapping into the ether, as Tesla put it, that's what CERN's all about. It's all about Tesla.
Now, Doug, you've written about Tesla and the ether and stuff like that in a couple of your books, haven't you?
Right, I have. Yeah, the issue of the ether and whether there isn't an ether, of course, has been a major argument for physicists and spiritualists, really going all the way back to Anton Mesmer and before him. The whole issue of whether or not there is this sort of discrete, we might call it a fluid, that, but it's not a wet fluid, but it's something that exists even in the so-called vacuum of space, that there really isn't a vacuum in the vacuum of space, that there still is some kind of discrete reality that permeates all of the universe. And it perhaps is that which, I know we haven't mentioned his name yet, Joseph P. Farrell, but someone I've read quite a bit about. I think we all have read some, and I know, Anthony, you've had a chance to have some conversations with Farrell. But the issue of there needs to be sort of some kind of medium in which the sort of non-locality of particles, the way that they can propagate, there needs to be some way for them to propagate, or for a particle on one side of the universe that's sort of resonantly connected with another particle on the other side of the universe. How can they reach out and touch each other? And so there's this idea that there must be some kind of just as air is the media that propagates sound waves, there needs to be some kind of media that propagates sort of the non-locality of particles. And so it's a big argument, and Einstein kind of didn't want to use the concept of the ether, and then towards the end of his life he kind of came back to it and sort of suggested maybe there is an ether. And right. And of course ether is actually the Greek word for air or atmosphere. And I'll just throw out one other thing, and then I'll let you guys kind of chew on this. The German poet, I thought this was interesting. I would pronounce his name Goethe, but Goethe is probably the proper pronunciation. My German's not so good, but he made this statement, which I thought is interesting. Of course, he wrote this a couple 200, 300 years ago. He said, "We walk in mysteries. We are surrounded by an atmosphere about which we still know nothing at all." I think it's key that he said atmosphere. "We do not know what stirs in it and how it is connected with our intelligence. This much is certain: under particular conditions, the antennae of our souls are able to reach out beyond their physical limitations." And so this concept of a connection between consciousness and this other dimension, that is another real big issue. And then there is this question of, okay, I'm a scientist. I want to understand what is the physical, we'll use the word physical connection, meaning dimensional connection between these different realities. So I'll hush now.
Well, I think you're describing, and I'll just make this real quick, Josh, and you jump in. What you just described is quantum entanglement. And that's what Einstein said, spooky action at a distance. And the basic premise is if you have a particle light years away, or even close to you in, let's say, a mile distance, these particles can communicate with each other. If you act upon a particle here in this location, an identical particle, and this is where supersymmetry, the theory of it, comes into play, the same action or reaction will take place at a distance as if the two are connected physically. And I think that what we're describing here, and when we talk about the universe being comprised of plasma, the plasma is the medium, it is the ether, and that provides that form of communication, that modality of communication, even light years apart.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that it seems like with this idea of the ether, physicists don't really seem to like that word very much, but it in a lot of ways, some of the things that they say, it's like they're catching up to that idea. Going back to quantum field theory, they'll say that the universe is comprised of how many was it? I want to say 58 different quantum fields, and even in the vacuum of space, you can't have a spot that's perfectly empty because there's virtual particles popping in and out and things like that. But what's interesting too is that they'll say, and it's always funny, the confusing. I think it's done intentionally. The confusing terminology or ways that they say things. They'll say empty space isn't really empty, when really what they should say maybe is empty space doesn't exist or empty space isn't real. Because with the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, the boson was important, but the main discovery of that was if there's a particle, it means if there's a fundamental particle, I should say, it means there's a field. So it was proof of the existence of the Higgs field. What's interesting about that is because there's a Higgs field, it means that the universe is not in a true vacuum. And actually, in my the newest book, it's not out yet, but will be soon. I kind of liken it to it's on this like razor edge of an energy level. I think it's 200 and some odd. The energy level that the Higgs field is on is like incredibly precise, to where if it was off by a little bit, it would just be devastating. And I use the analogy of a ball at the base of a really just short slope, like a small foothill or something, and then at the end of that foothill is a giant cliff going straight down. And that's like where the Higgs field is at. Now, because it's the preferred energy level of the Higgs field would be, careening off the cliff, but there's that little foothill that is preventing it. So I actually heard this first from Joe Licken. He said if there statistically this will happen someday, but if there was a quantum fluctuation or a little like a little piece of excitement in the Higgs field that would send it over that foothill in one localized area, basically it would create a bubble of the true vacuum, because it would go, like the ball, it would go up that foothill and go careening down the cliff, and it would expand everywhere at the speed of light in the universe. Now, what's interesting is that physicists, know that they have that idea, yet they're still, doing things at CERN and the LHC that adds energy into those fields, and there might be prophetic implications to that as well, and I get more into that in the book. But so there's about the ether. I think that's interesting. They won't use the word, but in a sense that's kind of what they're talking about.
Well, you bring up something that's rather interesting. You mentioned the word vacuum or bubble, and Dr. Stephen Hawking of this year used the same word, the same description of his fear, his concern, again the pun with CERN. he's not so much worried about the creation of black holes. Now, a lot of people have associated black holes with Hawking, and yet he's stepping away from that. He's recognizing that, again, these are just theoretical. No one has ever been able to actually prove by measuring and reproducing black holes. Whether you look at it on a cosmological scale and say, oh, well, that's a black hole that we're observing, you cannot actually prove that it's a black hole with the instruments that we have. With that said, Hawking has said, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, I'm not so much concerned about them creating microscopic black holes or large ones. I'm worried about them creating vacuum bubbles, a bubble that would instantaneously, at the speed of light, envelop the Earth, if not the entire universe.
Yep. Yeah, and that would be devastating. And you know, I think the reason that why people aren't more worried about this, the general public, because the general public's usually worried about them creating a black hole, but I think this is a more plausible thing. It's because things like quantum field theory, it's not a generally known thing, you know, and the very few physicists that'll even talk about it, they don't communicate it well. But basically, using the Large Hadron Collider as an example, when they fire two protons at one another, it's not, and to create like a Higgs boson, it's not that the parts of a Higgs boson are in those protons and when they come together it creates it. It's that at every point in space there's dozens of, you know, quantum fields, and this is just how the physicists say it works. If it actually works this way, I don't know, but this is just what they say. But there's dozens of quantum fields, so what happens is when those two protons collide, it sends energy rippling out to these other fields, and if enough of that energy goes into, say, the Higgs field, then, because again a particle is just a fluctuation, a quantum fluctuation in a field, if enough of that energy goes into the Higgs field, it can create a Higgs boson. So the protons have just except for the energy, the protons have nothing to do with the Higgs boson or any other particle. It's just used as a means to add energy to another field. I did a video called CERN Alchemy. I likened what they're doing at CERN, it's sort of, well, basically is alchemy, quantum alchemy. But I likened it to, you know, some people kind of look at the Large Hadron Collider as like a blender. You know, you put banana, milk, and you know, some ice cream in a blender, and you get, you know, a new thing, a banana smoothie, but it's made of the old stuff. It's actually more like if you were to put a banana, milk, and ice cream in a blender and turn it on and get a golden watch or something.
I could dig that.
I've read your blog post. Yeah, you have some very, very interesting analogies the way you put things together.
Well, you know, one thing that comes to mind, which I've talked about in a couple of my books, and again, I'm probably not even a layman in these subjects, but I have written about them, which just proves I'm foolish. But you know, is what is this sort of most fundamental medium?
Yeah.
And you know, I'll see, what's David's last name? I'm trying to think of not David
Wilcox.
Wilcox, thank you. David Wilcox would say that the most fundamental medium is gravity. That's what he says. I actually believe it's time. Now, time and you know, electric you know, plasma may end up being the same thing. It may just be what we call it, but it kind of makes sense to talk in terms of something that is created in a, you know, in what we would just kind of commonly call now Einsteinian space-time. And that time, in effect, is you know, sort of what it is. But I just throw that out and ask maybe you guys to comment on that. You know, again, Wilcox talks about gravity as sort of this universal medium. Others call it the ether, the atmosphere, the air, the vacuum, which, you know, is you know, really doesn't mean vacuum in the way that we commonly talk about it. It's just that scientists want to say that because they don't want to admit that there's something there they can't explain. But time, you know, is it time? Are time and electric plasma sort of two words for the same reality?
Well, I have my opinions, but Josh, go ahead. I don't want to hog the
Oh no, you're the guest. I'm the host. You go first. You probably know, you probably have more to say on this than I do anyway. But yeah, go for it.
Well, I view time as just a point of reference for us as human beings. It's linear in our frame of reference. We think of the past, we think of the future. It's a straight line. However, I have followed along with, but changed a little bit of Einstein's theory of relativity in the sense that he believes that gravity affects time. I said this earlier, and that if you go out far enough in the universe, you'll see the curvature of space taking place. The gravity is curving space and therefore curving time itself. So if you take that and you say, well, perhaps you could go far enough in that distance that you would see the curvature coming full circle and forming not only a circle, but what I consider to be a sphere. I believe that our measurable frame of reference that we call our universe is actually spherical, that we reside within a sphere. And therefore time, if it's part of that spherical structure, as Einstein is describing it, being bent by gravity, that time is cyclical. It's a circular motion, and that it will repeat. If we take that down to our everyday existence and we look at the short span of human history, we see that cycle. Some people call it poetry, but we see that repetition of history that takes place. We see that physically, we see that philosophically, and even theologically, that repetition. So I believe that the universe is actually a sphere, and therefore you cannot necessarily go back in time. I do believe it's always a forward motion, but you theoretically could go forward into the future. Now, some people have said that perhaps that's what CERN is doing, the LHC, that it's manipulating time. Some want to say it's manipulated the past in the form of the Mandela effects that we've been hearing about lately. But certainly I think that there's a higher probability that you could at least step somewhere into the near future, time-wise. But I don't believe you can go back in time.
Let me throw out a couple of challenges to that, Anthony. And again, I'll just throw out, one thing is I think Tesla was very vocal about, he did not believe that gravity bent time. If I'm not mistaken, he was pretty vocal that that was a ridiculous concept, that that gravity would bend space-time. He would say that if there's a constituent of whatever you want to call it, that in effect is the fundamental medium, that everything that is, we might call it energy or matter, is sort of it exists because of this medium. And so he sort of argued against Einstein's concept of bending of space-time. And then another thing I'll throw out, again, and both you guys comment, is Farrell talks about, he uses this phrase, time is not a scalar. And so, and I think what he's saying is that time is not, as you said, Anthony, just a measuring stick. It's not just a XY plot. It's not just a frame of reference, but time itself actually imparts reality to, you might say, the reality around it, and that matter and energy both, in effect, they get their reality from whatever this discrete medium is, whether we call it time or we call it plasma. So you might react to those things.
Well, I think you're talking about observation, and yeah, Dr. Farrell I hold as sort of my mentor at large. I've learned an awful lot from him, and he's shown me how to research as well through his publications. But really, to get to the nub of the issue, I agree. Time is, I think, a reflection of the observation that takes place by us as a human. We're observing a quantum state. We're observing the change of energy to a particle. When we observe something, we change its state, we change its nature, and therefore we're fixing it in a point in time. Again, because in our limited minds, in our limited intellect, we have to have something tangible that we can define our reality by, and we do that through time. So I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what Tesla's saying. In fact, when we talk about the model of the universe being spherical in my model, it is not so much gravity, even though I said that, because that's what people are more familiar with is Einstein's work versus Tesla's. I'm in agreement with Tesla, because gravity, if you take 1 unit of gravity, if we want to talk about a graviton as a particle, its power as compared to the electromagnetic forces of attraction, electromagnetic lines of force, electromagnetism, which is what Tesla was so focused on, and that's the basis of his research. Electromagnetism, 1 unit of that, is 10 to the 37th power stronger than gravity. So on a 1-to-1 representation, gravity is 10 to the 37th power weaker than the electromagnetic lines of force that exist in the plasma environment of the universe.
Wow.
Well, that's pretty incredible. What do you think then when, do you think that, because again, I've sort of read Tesla probably through the filter of Joseph Farrell, but when he says that he does not believe that matter warps time or that gravity warps time, is that something that you think is that correct? Is that how we're to understand what he was saying?
Yeah, I think what Tesla was trying to describe for us was the fact that time is affected by the electromagnetic forces of the universe. Picture a magnet attracting time. Now that's hard for us to really conceptualize or put into a set of tools to measure that, but I believe that time is affected by the charge states. And I'm going to define that even further. If you take a planet, let's say, we'll talk about Saturn perhaps later in our discussion, but just for the point of reference, let's say that Saturn has a negative charge. Its overall makeup is a negative magnetic charge. And let's say that the Earth is positive. Well, if you take 2 magnets like that and bring them into close proximity, they're going to attract one another. If you have that ability to do that with time, that perhaps time has a charge, if it's an opposite charge to a planet like Saturn, let's say time is positive and Saturn is overall negative, that the time as it moves past Saturn or as Saturn moves through time could actually change or manipulate, perhaps slow down or accelerate time, depending on the proximity of that time wave. Now time, we can't really say it's a wave, we can't really say it's a particle. It's more a form of measurement, but if we're going to say that it has a state of existence, let's say it's a wave, and if that wave of time moves past Saturn, perhaps it's initially accelerated because of dissimilar charges, and as it moves past Saturn, it slows down. I don't know. That's just an off the top of the head sort of answer to your question.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm beginning to get what you're saying. Josh, you should jump in now. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
Oh, I was going to say that's it's fascinating. I mean, mind-blowing stuff. But I'm what I'm curious about too is along with all that, we talked a little bit about quantum entanglement earlier. The strange thing about quantum entanglement is that it's supposed to be able to happen at an absolute instant, or faster than light, but it seems like it's described as instantaneously. If you have a particle at one end of the universe and a particle at another end, when you make a change to one, instantaneously, no time at all passes, instantaneously the change happens in the other one. And with something that is, I'm curious what you guys think, how that fits in with an electric universe model, but also how quantum entanglement is being utilized in things like quantum computing and things like that.
Oh, man, that's a big issue. But Anthony, you should go ahead. This is not my area.
Well, when we talk about vast distances and 2 particles that are connected through quantum entanglement, I almost want to lean towards the direction of taking time out of the discussion entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're operating not just at a speed that is faster than the speed of light, thus violating the theory of relativity, and Einstein saying that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. And I'm being very paraphrased with that. I think you have to be talking about instantaneous states. In other words, there is no time reference that's necessary when you're describing that communication that's taking place between two quantum entangled particles. They're behaving simultaneously because there is no time in this equation. They're just happening. They're just behaving in an identical fashion at the same moment without time even being a limiting factor or even a defining factor.
Even though they're located at, let's say, in this discussion, at opposite ends of the universe, that neither time nor space really is relevant?
Exactly, because the only reason that time is relevant is because we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we said earlier, you cannot separate the physical from the spiritual and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have discussed the theory or the idea that spiritual beings operate in an existence in which time is irrelevant. When we talk about God and time, from a Christian point of view, certainly from God's perspective, time is irrelevant. The only reason it becomes relevant is because we're mere mortals, and we operate in a physical realm, and that requires us to have some form of point of reference. It just happens to be time, but it really is irrelevant in the greater scheme of the universe.
Talk for a moment about the concept of angels and demons, of the existence of these types of realities and other entities. You know, we know that in effect, the conspiracy theory behind CERN is that we're trying to create a pathway, an open doorway to these entities. Does that suggest that existence exists in these other dimensions? And I guess it just raises all kinds of interesting questions. The concept of sort of, I guess, non-locality, the idea that these two particles can be connected without time or space, sort of makes you wonder if there really is any way that we can talk about that concept and at the same time talk about this other dimension in which there seem to be entities that we can come into contact with, and that they come in contact with us, usually not for our benefit.
Well, I think we can use a tool to really make that tangible for people, and that's the quantum computer. Now, there's a lot that we can say about the quantum computer in terms of the specific one that I'm talking about utilizes quantum bits or qubits in replacing transistors. So we have to define a quantum computer. In this case, it's a qubit-based computer. Now, how that operates, there are multiple points of discussion on the mechanics of it, but to go to your point of non-locality and instantaneous behavior of two identical particles at a distance, as well as entities or spirits in another dimension, let's define dimension in terms of how this computer operates. Think of an oscilloscope, and on the screen you have a waveform. You have a peak. So at the base you have a wide base. At the top you have a point. You have a wave, a spike that goes up and goes down. In the quantum world, there's a thing called quantum tunneling, in which in our dimension we are able to send a signal. Let's call it a quantum particle, just for the sake of discussion. A quantum particle in our dimension is sent through the base of that spike. It does that by tunneling through, rather than going all the way to the top of the spike and then back over the top and down to the other side into the other dimension. It takes a shortcut. It's kind of the brute force approach to communicating with another dimension through quantum tunneling, in which this quantum particle moves through the base of that spike into that other dimension, to the other side of that spike. That's how the quantum computer, the adiabatic quantum computer, operates. This is also what the Large Hadron Collider is attempting to do in the realm of the Higgs field. If we're going to appreciate or accept the description or definition of a field as being a Higgs field, it is actually tunneling through that Higgs field to another dimension to establish that line of communication. You need that open doorway, you need that open line of communication, that tunneling to be constant, to be fixed. When you're using a quantum computer, you're using very short periods of time in which the tunneling takes place. It is extracting the solution to a problem, to a combinatorial equation, obtaining that solution from the other dimension, the other side, and then that extraction takes place through the reverse quantum tunneling, through that spike, in other words, the dimensional barrier, and that equation, the solution to it, returns to us in our dimension. At the quantum level, that computer is operating identically to how the Large Hadron Collider is attempting to operate at a macro scale to establish a fixed tunneling or portal process of two-way communication. So you have now the ability, utilizing the machine, to communicate to the spiritual world, which is on the other side of that spike, that barrier between the dimensions, that ability to fix with a machine an open tunnel.
Wow. Yeah, and that doesn't sound good at all.
Doesn't sound wise.
No. So what kinds of things would be possible with a machine like that, like with a quantum computer? And like if like say if like our government developed something like that, or just for sake of conversation, what could actually be? Are there any limits to what could be achieved with that type of technology?
I'm sure there are limits, but in between here and the limits is an entirely different way of looking at life. Now, I'm going to start off with talking about Hawking again, Stephen Hawking, because he said, you do not want to communicate with these entities. He called them entities. You do not want to open that doorway because you're not going to like what comes through. Now, this comes from an avowed atheist. So even he is very afraid of what is going on with this machine. Now, in terms of the computer itself, when I say machine, I'm talking about the LHC. But in terms of the adiabatic quantum computer, this is connected with what's going on at CERN. The two work in tandem together. Now, you will not find that in the public realm, but those two are operating. The purpose of that machine being connected with the LHC is for the establishment and maintenance of that portal that I described. Now, the machine itself, a little bit of background. The first model was the 128. That was purchased by Lockheed in conjunction with USC. They have an adiabatic quantum computer there. They have a quantum computer lab there. It's all public information. 128 to the Model 512 to the Model 124, or excuse me, the 1024, and now released in February, the 2048. Now that number is critical to understand, the 2048. That comes from Shor's algorithm. This is a algorithm, this is a series of numbers, covers a full sheet of paper, if you will, that was developed by developed by Shor, Dr. Shor. He said it would take a quantum computer to develop or to solve his algorithm. And the purpose of this, solving it, was to find all the prime numbers, the prime factors of this. He said that no existing transistor-based computer could solve the 2048 Shor's algorithm. That was long before the adiabatic quantum computer was ever conceived. The first model of that computer was able to solve the 2048 algorithm. The reason that that's important is that goes to encryption, data encryption, communication, secure communication. With Shor's algorithm, you can crack every form of encryption that exists today. So there are no secure lines or forms of communication on the planet. Utilizing this computer, you can crack every code out there because they're now obsolete in the face of the 2048 algorithm. If you have this quantum computer, which is utilizing the 2048 algorithm, you can create your own language, your own form of encryption. You now have absolute secure lines of communication that no other computer in the world can crack.
Let me insert a question then. That's
Sure.
incredible. I have a bit of a computer background, having worked with some of those big names like Microsoft and Oracle and so forth. So the idea, I guess, really is who is going to have these computers? Does anyone that contributes to CERN, is it going to have an adiabatic computer? Is that what you called it?
Right.
Yeah, adiabatic. That's I gotta practice that and make sure I've got that right.
Without heat transfer or heat resistance.
Okay, and so this sounds like a tool of the elites that only the elite will have, but basically all bona fide governments might have these computers, but the ISISes of the world, or the Christian Church or whatever, won't have these computers. So
Right.
that everything is open to to the governments, to the all-seeing eye. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I have said many times, this computer is the beast system that we see in Revelation. This is a system that will enable the one world government, the one world religion, and the ability to track every person who takes the mark of the beast. And that's a whole nother discussion, the mark of the beast. But this computer has the equivalent processing power. The 2048 that came out in February has the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. Now, we can't even wrap our heads around what that really means. But the point is, I'll give you an example. The Tianyi 2 in China, at the time was the fastest quantum computer on the planet, or supercomputer, I should say, on the planet. And it was, this goes back to the 512 model, but at the time, they did a little test, and they put forth a problem to the Tianyi 2 that took that computer 30 minutes to arrive at a solution. It took 10 seconds for the adiabatic quantum computer, and that was the 512 model. We're now at the 2048 model. So we really don't have the ability to appreciate the processing power, but also what the capabilities are. This is an interdimensional functioning computer. When I say that this changes life, this changes how we perceive life, even how we perceive time, this is what I'm referring to. And that's why this computer is tied with the agenda of opening a portal, because it operates in an interdimensional mechanism in a fashion, the same thing as what they're trying to achieve with the LHC. So this changes everything. And from a standpoint of prophecy, this is the machine that enables prophecy in Revelation to unfold before our eyes.
Mm. I certainly can see how it would have the processing power to achieve that. I think there's no question about that. I remember hearing a lecture not that long ago, from a person from Microsoft Research that was talking about quantum computing and talking about certain kinds of processes or problems that could be, that would take perhaps perhaps thousands of years for a digital computer to solve, can be solved in seconds with a quantum computer. And
Correct.
Of course that is truly mind-boggling. I guess a question I'd throw out is to what extent will the quantum computer and what you're talking about really have an implication? Does it have the ability to manipulate things back in our sort of simple 3 or 4-dimensional world, or is it off in its own world by itself, and never the twain shall meet?
Well, it will always operate in our frame of reference, but it will because it communicates, let's just say it communicates with the other side. It is obtaining answers to combinatorial problems from another dimension. So if you really want to take this to a spiritual aspect, it's communicating with entities. So like the headset that you're wearing right now, that's the adiabatic quantum computer with the other dimensions. So communication is taking place already.
Wow. Do you think that quantum computing might be the, well, we'll just say from Revelation 9, the key to the abyss? And does do things like artificial intelligence have anything to do with this as well?
Absolutely. Back in 2010, the manufacturer, and I got in trouble for mentioning the manufacturer's name, but you can certainly find it if you Google adiabatic quantum computer. But in their press release in 2010, they said that in early 2015, they would be releasing a computer that had the processing equivalency of 7 billion human brains, and they said it would be artificially intelligent. Now, in February, when they presented their press release on the Model 2048, they said, 7 billion human brains, but they did not mention AI. This is, in the present time, an active artificially intelligent computer, and we can define what artificial intelligence means, but it is a thinking machine. It is a self-learning machine. Its basis for artificial intelligence, to make it very short and succinct here, is human behavior, modeling of human behavior. The first reason for developing this computer and the cracking of the 2048 algorithm was for predictive modeling of human behavior as well as the physical environmental behavior. In other words, what was happening on one side of the planet having an effect on the other side? What were the ripple effects? What was the butterfly effect? If something happened here, and how would it affect the other side of the planet? They initially tested that theory of human behavior predictive modeling by tapping into the markets, the stock markets and the commodity trades. And they were actually able to predict what would happen in the markets and take market advantage. This is something that Dr. Farrell has mentioned, and we talked about this in our private conversation last week, the interruption of trades and taking advantage and taking profit in a black budget operating mechanism. This is what this computer does. It generates profits for the black world by interrupting trades.
We might just explain that might just explain what we're saying to the listeners, because they weren't part of that conversation, that the idea that so much of what is going on in science, the secret space program, what's happening at CERN, where does all the money come from to fund all this? In effect, it's called the black budget, and what you've thrown out there, which I assume Joseph Farrell is asserted as well, is that this cadre of folks, they sort of tap in, in a microsecond, nanosecond into the markets, manipulate the markets, take profit, and you might see it as almost like a tax on the world system to fund the research that they're doing on behalf of all of humanity, which I say that tongue-in-cheek, of course.
Right.
So that is, of course, that's mind-boggling, and you talk about the ultimate conspiracy theory. Boy, that is a grand conspiracy theory. So
you have unlimited funds to do whatever you choose to do. Now, this computer, not just directed with the LHC, and we talk about portals and all of that, but let's get back to the discussion of the Book of Revelation and the Mark of the Beast, because this now has the ability to simultaneously and instantaneously track every individual who takes the Mark of the Beast. In past years, people have thought, gee, how could you have a computer system that could track everybody, their behavior, their decision-making processes, everything that they're communicating? How could you have a computer that would know all and be all? Well, we have that computer. Because with the Mark of the Beast, not only will everyone be tracked, and we always hear in Scripture about you won't be able to buy or sell. The transactions will be prevented if you don't take the Mark of the Beast. Well, if you have everything in the world being processed through a quantum computer, all of the information in the world being real-time accessed by this computer, and therefore everything being tracked, then you have the ability to fulfill what Revelation is talking about. But let's go beyond that a step and go back to what I mentioned, and that's predictive human behavior, the modeling of human behavior. In other words, predicting the future. What is going to happen tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now? All of this modeling is the core of the processing of this computer. When we talk about artificial intelligence, a big slice of that definition of AI is predicting the future. Specifically, what will humans do? If you do this to this group, what does it do to the rest of the world? If you do this to an individual, what does it do to all the individuals in the world? So it's not just tracking, not just buying and selling. It's predicting the future and taking advantage of that, knowing the future.
It definitely sounds like the Minority Report, the movie The Minority Report. Sure. It's like arresting Josh for doing something that Josh will do but hasn't done yet.
And that he doesn't even know he's going to do.
Yeah, that's not good news.
Is there do you think there's a connection between artificial intelligence and the image of the beast?
Certainly. When we talk about the image of the beast, we're talking about the creation of Satan. We're talking about the Antichrist. We're talking about the indwelling of a beast by the spirit of Satan. And the image of the beast performs miracles and wonders, as it says in Scripture. This computer already is performing miracles and wonders. We can only imagine what will happen during the 7 years of tribulation and certainly the latter 3.5 years. So when the Antichrist is revealed to us and the beast system is let loose upon this planet, it will be functionally capable by way of this computer. This is the computer that will be the beast system. So
wow,
we're seeing the leading edge of it.
Well, I would say that it certainly could be. You know, the question of exactly what the beast system is, you know, perhaps we won't know it until we see it. I know even like our friend Sheridan Gilbert talks in terms of the internet itself as sort of the all-seeing eye, that it's everywhere, and it itself is potentially the beast system. So there's different ways that, you know, ultimately we can be manipulated, and you know, there's no way we can, there's no place we can run, no place we can hide. I don't know if we can entirely get off the grid even, but that of course is, you know, I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I would just say that, you know, it could be, because it has the raw processing power to accomplish that, to be sure.
Yeah, what's interesting too is one of the talking points that you that you sent me is with all these advances and all these new technologies, there's also a lot of PSYOPs and disinformation campaigns and things like that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when we talk about psychological operations and disinformation that's put out specifically through the internet, this goes to predictive modeling. Give you a tangible example. A few weeks ago, there was a YouTube video that was sent to me that I think, you know, we have seen, the three of us, in which supposedly there was, through remote viewing, individuals that observed nuclear meltdowns and fires underground with the LHC, which of course was total nonsense. And I came out immediately the same day and debunked it in a series of videos and interviews that I did. Saying that this is a obvious campaign of disinformation and a psychological operation. So let's talk about PSYOPs. PSYOPs is really predictive human behavior, predictive modeling of human behavior. I am convinced that this story was put out there for the purpose of watching the human reaction, to see first who watched the video, and then how they reacted and responded to it, and how they communicated the video and the contents of it to other people. We talk about social media. This is all building algorithms on how people behave, how they react to information. So they're not only just looking at, well, who are all the conspiracy theorists that are all jumping on the bandwagon about this, or people that are cheering and saying, yeah, the machine's destroyed, or gosh, I wish it was destroyed, or other horrible things that people might say, because the three of us have already talked about the fact that we have no ill will towards anyone, and specifically the scientists and engineers and people that are working at CERN. These are just human beings like us that are suffering under just grand deception put on them by Satan. They're believing the lie of immortality, that ye shall be as gods. They believe in transhumanism and immortality, and we'll talk about that rabbit hole. But getting back to this whole thing, psychological operations are for the purpose of developing and refining human behavior modeling, the modeling of how people respond to information.
Well, there's so many different places we could go, but I definitely think we should get into some of the theories and the facts as it relates to the kind of the occult backing. Why is Shiva, the statue of Shiva, out front of CERN? Why was CERN built on top of, apparently, an old ancient Roman temple to Apollo, to Apollyon, the destroyer? There's really a lot of stuff there that we haven't even scratched the surface of, and and I certainly agree with you that we're not out to get anybody or to say bad about the scientists at CERN, but there appears to be more than meets the eye, to say the least, as it relates to what is the motivation behind this issue. Why do we want to open a portal to the other side and to maintain an open doorway back and forth to other dimensions? So you might speak to that. We might have a discussion on that.
Yeah, the statue Shiva was a gift from the Indian government, and it's a Hindu god to destruction and then the rebirth, the rebuilding, the reconstruction of the universe. That's all well and good if you're a Hindu, but if you're a Christian and you're looking at it, you begin to think, well, why would you not have, for example, a Christian cross outside the headquarters of CERN? Why would you have, this particular entity as something that, yeah, it's a gift from the Indian government, that's all well and good, but is there more to it than it simply just being a gift and they're being courteous and saying, yeah, we'll put it outside the building, that's all well and good? Because you begin to look at things like, again, the CERN logo. Many people have talked about Shiva. They've talked about the CERN logo being 666. Well, that's well and good as well. But let's go a little deeper. There are curved plates of glass behind which there are animal skins and parchments of Sanskrit writing, Hebraic writing, Chinese writings. These are ancient writings that essentially are talking about the frequencies and the energies that need to be utilized, and in the form of rituals that need to be utilized in the opening spiritually of dimensional portals. Now, this has direct application to the technology being employed in addition to the spiritual, the frequencies, the sounds, if you will, that are being used to open the portal. So there's a lot behind what I just said, but I'm citing some of the tangible evidence. Earlier this year, CERN produced their own video called Symmetry. And those that have looked at it and inspected it and interpreted it can see that these are rituals, that this is occult in nature, and it is actually showing the destruction of the machine itself upon the opening of a portal. So you have to ask yourself, why all the occult or hidden symbolism? Why the use of non-Christian theologies, if you will? Why are they openly acknowledging through ritual and symbolism the occult nature of their agenda?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And this is something I've been wondering about too. Is it I'm kind of torn between two different ways of looking at it, and I think I'm leaning towards one, but they might actually complement one another. One of them is that just based on, from a human perspective, it's unintentional, yet there's spiritual forces that are kind of pulling the strings and showing themselves in these ways. That's one way of looking at it. Another one, which I think I'm leaning more towards this, but I do think that first thing has something to do with it too, is that there are people behind the scenes that are in control of a lot of these things, and they're the ones that, these shadow groups or whatever, they're the ones that promulgate these types of things. But even again, like you had mentioned, they're still human. They're still, under a mass deception that would be from the enemy. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, that kind of thing. So they're still human, and there's at least a type of ignorance there on their part. But what do you guys think? Doug, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I certainly think it's incredible to think that you could get, I don't know, Anthony, how many countries it is, but I think it's over 100 that are participating in the CERN project, that you could get 100 countries to agree on anything. It's pretty remarkable. And the fact that there's this occult sort of backdrop to this whole thing, that somehow it's sort of, even if they're just saying, well, there's this sort of wisdom literature that goes back thousands and thousands of years that talks in terms of how to reach out and touch the other side, that this is just sort of an iconic or metaphor for what we're trying to do with a machine. That these people were trying to do it with rituals, and we're coming up with this thing called a quantum computer and a hadron collider, and we're going to prove that we have the optimal way to, in effect, open the door to these other dimensions. And so even if it's just sort of a symbol of humankind's quest to be as the gods, it still, from my standpoint, puts it in a very, a danger. It's a highway to a danger zone, is what it is, to quote Kenny Loggins. Haven't thought of that song quite in this context, but it is a highway to the danger zone. And so I'm very leery of where they're going, and the fact that you have Shiva, Apollo, Apollyon. You have the logo of CERN that, maybe it's the arms of Shiva, but it looks a lot like 666 to me. Is that there's something that's up to no good, something evil this way comes.
Well, I think we'll agree that symbols have power.
Yeah,
absolutely, they do.
And if symbols have power, then that answers the question: why do you have these symbols at CERN? They're not just tip of the hat to ancient history. They're not just being nice guys and saying, "Oh, well, thank you for this statue."
Right.
Power is derived. Symbols are mechanisms of communication to the other side.
Yeah, I agree, and that certainly is, I think, is anyone that has any occult background would, which I don't happily, but would understand that is in fact the case, that there is some kind of talismanic effect, if I'm making up or coining a term there, but having a talisman that in effect does provoke or invoke some sort of spiritual power, that they're surrounding themselves with this as perhaps another amplifier to help generate additional opening capability of this portal.
Sure.
So it's bizarre.
Many people have made the connection that this machine is the modern day version of the Tower of Babel. That was supposed to be a tower to reach to heaven.
Right.
Well, really, it's a reaching to another dimension. So that I agree, it is the Tower of Babel. We talked about the Roman temple to the god Apollo or Apollyon or Abaddon. Abaddon is the key to the abyss. It's theorized that the LHC sits over the doorway to the abyss. And they didn't just place it there because it was cheap real estate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I assume that if you look at a ley line map, that there's probably a big intersection right in the middle of that hadron collider.
Yeah, the nexus of ley lines, definitely. It definitely is an energy point.
No,
Now,
I
I
agree.
won't go off on this tangent, but this is where it connects to Saturn. You know, we've talked about the occult a little bit here, and I think this is where we need to use that as the foundation for discussion about Saturn. Saturn, all through recorded history, has been a focal point of worship, and it really doesn't matter which culture, in what area of the planet that you want to talk about. Every culture has revered Saturn primarily as the original sun and the source of all life. Now, in recent times, you know, we talk about the Nazis. Dr. Farrell talks about the Nazis. The worship of the black sun. The black sun, that worship is Saturn. And that carries on over into, we talked about symbols being powerful. A lot of corporate logos are variations on the Saturn iconic symbolism. The worship of Saturn, to most people, most lay people walking the streets today, say, well, Saturn isn't on my radar. Saturn isn't a part of my life. I don't even know anybody who worships Saturn. So how can that be real? How can that be tangible? Or how can that even be connected to CERN? That's just absurd.
Some, of course, would say, well, no, we're actually getting ready to worship Saturn, Saturnalia, December
right.
25th. So I'll just throw that out.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's at the time of this recording.
Yes.
This is actually going to be released the very first second of 2016, right on New Year's. So,
Okay.
so to the audience who's listening, Christmas has already happened, but to us, it's still future. It's what, the
For some,
23rd.
you've made it through the worship of Saturn.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Saturn figures heavily into the agenda with the LHC. So, by way of background, the electric model of the universe we spoke of, in that theory, in that discussion, in that construct, the basis for the electric model of the universe came about through the study of ancient cave drawings and carvings, multiple cultures across the planet that were representing the same things that were being observed in the skies of Earth. What they were observing were discharges of plasma in the heavens. So I'm going to ask the audience to picture this. We have an alignment of planets, Saturn at the top of this line, then Venus, moving downward to Mars, and eventually to the Earth. You have a direct alignment of these planets, and they're in such close proximity to one another that there are electrical discharges taking place between the planets, all the way down from Saturn to the Earth. Saturn and the Earth were connected by way of Venus and Mars being in a straight line configuration.
By the way, let me just
Yeah.
throw out there, well, for background, so that we don't lose listeners thinking this guy's absolutely off his rocker. This is discussed in great detail. Boy, I mean in painful detail, because I've watched some of these videos, and they go into more detail than I care to go into, regarding all of these ancient petroglyphs, cave drawings, and things that even come forward to Virgil, Homer, you know, and so forth, in terms of recording this worship of Saturn and the concepts that there was at one time in this theory, we'll say. And you know, of course, what they're doing is they're showing just an enormous amount of empirical data that these symbols were resident all around the world in all of these cultures, and that the patterns and the symbols are the same. And of course, this is talked about at the Thunderbolts project, which you introduced me to, Anthony, in some very well produced, albeit some of them are a little bit laborious in terms of their length. But nevertheless, this is, and then it's really backed up also by a guy named Anthony Perrault, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who actually works for us because he works for the U.S. government out at Alamogordo, and he's a plasma physicist that has done this research, and a guy named Robert Schoch and others that are pretty well known and highly regarded anthropologists or archaeologists would confirm all this. So anyway, just to provide some credibility and support to what you're saying, so please go ahead now. I'll hush.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing that. This is all built on the shoulders of Velikovsky and his book regarding the electric universe. So there's been quite a bit of research from bona fide people, not just some wacko like me who's putting all this information out and making things up out of thin air. We'll get to the thin air wacko stuff in a minute, but we're really talking about tangible physical evidence that backs up the theory that the planets were in alignment and they were electrically connected. Now, what is going on at CERN is that they are trying to reproduce what was called the Golden Age. Now, this was a time when we were connected to Saturn, and that there was this sharing of energy between the two planets. At that time, so the story goes, it's almost like the Garden of Eden here on Earth. There were no wars, there was no famine, there was no disease, according to this connection, this theory of connection between the planets. Now, of course, that did evolve into wars and famine and everything as the planets began to separate, and we ended up with the planetary configurations and the orbital pathways of today. Now, I'm going to go back even further. There's also the theory that Saturn and the Earth were connected within the plasma envelope, the heliosphere, if you will, of Saturn, when both Earth and Saturn were not part of this present-day solar system, that they were moving towards the sun and eventually captured by the sun's not so much gravity, but the attraction that we talked about before, the magnetic attraction of the two bodies, of Saturn and the sun. They were brought together magnetically into the solar system we know today. Now, where I'm going with this is the fact that there was an interaction between the heliosphere of the sun and the plasma envelope around Saturn. When that took place, there was a violent discharge that took place because of the electrical forces, and Venus was produced from Saturn. It was a daughter planet, and therefore when we talk about this alignment of Saturn and Venus, Mars and the Moon, it occurred because of this interaction between the plasma envelopes around the sun and the other one around Saturn. The Earth was then moved from its close proximity to Saturn and moved out of that plasma envelope surrounding Saturn into its present location. And when that occurred, the Golden Age ceased to exist. Now, I'm being very short with all of this, trying to keep everybody's attention here, but the goal now with the practitioners of the occult and the worship of Saturn is to recreate that Golden Age, to recreate the time where there was a plasma envelope enveloping the Earth because it was part of Saturn's envelope. Now let's step off to the side and talk about Satan for a moment. Satan wants to create his own version of heaven on earth, and he wants to create his own version of mankind. He wants to destroy what God has created. So in that, and there is a lot to that statement, but in that, in particular with Saturn, the goal is to electrically reconnect Earth and Saturn using the LHC. Now, I have a lot more to add, but go ahead and jump in if you have a question.
Well, just that I've written, as Josh knows, because he helped me do multiple hours of interviews on the issue of Mars and the electrical discharges that occurred between Mars and some other planet, perhaps a planet that, as Farrell, Joseph P. Farrell, Thomas Flanders, and others have not prognosticated, that have
Promulgated.
hypothesized. Yeah, they promulgated it, and they've hypothesized, just to get all the right big words in there, that there was a planet that was destroyed that became the asteroid belt, and but it does reinforce the notice or the concept of worlds in collision, Velikovsky's thesis, and of course there's a lot of plasma theory that shows that the craters on Mars and on Venus and on the Moon, that they could not have been impact craters. That some were, but many weren't, and of course that's part of the science as well, as why we see some of the characteristics or the configurations of craters that we see. So there is real science behind this, and again, you have all this archaeological evidence, and so anyway, so it's as fantastic and completely nonsensical as it sounds. There's actually a very strong empirical basis for it. I can't work out how it could actually work out, in terms of this, but I can say that there are a lot of scientists now that are beginning to embrace this idea and raising this question about, well, why is there this archaeological evidence all across the world that seems to be explained, as Anthony Perrault shows, that these are pictures that are symbols of these plasma discharges, and so it's an incredible story. But I think you should keep going. I think you're moving good. Keep going, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We'll talk about why they want to connect to Saturn at the end of this statement, but the physics that are involved. We talked about the vacuum of space actually being comprised of an electric plasma, or a charged field of plasma. That's the medium that they are going to take advantage of. When I spoke of the electrical discharges taking place between the planets in alignment, in the Bible it's described as Jacob's ladder. And if you were standing on Earth and looking up at Saturn, at this plasma conduit, is how I describe it, it would look like a ladder, wide at the base and narrowing towards the top, just because of the perspective. This plasma conduit is what they are trying to create utilizing the particle accelerator. The form of this plasma conduit are Birkeland currents. Now, Birkeland currents are two oppositely charged streams of electrons, positive and negative, and they're arranged in like a DNA helix. They're in a helical twisted pair fashion. These are naturally occurring in the universe. Hubble, the space telescope, has taken pictures of massive, even light years long, Birkeland currents existing in the universe. What the LHC has the capability of doing is to artificially create what occurs in nature, creating Birkeland currents that will travel through the ether, Tesla, travel through the plasma as a medium of communication, of transmission, of electrical energy from the LHC on the Earth to the southern pole of Saturn. People have emailed to me and said, how can they span that vast distance between Earth and Saturn utilizing just the LHC? Well, it's pretty simple. It's like a match thrown into a pile of tinder that has gasoline soaked in it. That's what the plasma is. It's tinder soaked in fuel, and all you have to do is strike a match and direct it. And that's what the LHC will do with its electrical energy, is to transmit that electrical energy through the plasma to the southern pole of Saturn. Now, I'll stop there before I get to why they want to make that connection happen.
Yeah, because it goes beyond anything that I'd even come across, and of course I'd studied a lot of these issues as it relates to Mars and the missing planet hypothesis and so forth. But the documentaries that are out there on the Thunderbolts project certainly provide the pictorial representation of this, and so I guess in terms of we have to ask, why would they want to create this? Why is it in fact the the overarching, and that probably is a pun too, the overarching reason for the connection between the Earth and Saturn, that they're trying to establish. Why would they want to do that? So it's like, in effect, it's a portal, but it's a portal to a specific place for a specific reason. And this is where it really gets spooky, because now you're going to get into Revelation 9, and instead of the abyss being in the center of the earth, I suppose what this is saying is that now the abyss, or the place where all these spirits have been relegated and confined, is in this planet, or at this planet called Saturn. Is that correctly what they are proposing, or is this sort of the ancient wisdom that they're thinking is what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I have two slightly different theories. The first one is that the leadership of the entities, the fallen angels described in Revelation, that the leadership exists. The angels that provided the hidden knowledge, the hidden technology, the forbidden fruit to those in the ancient times that were practitioners of the occult and the present day practitioners of the occult, that leadership is imprisoned within Saturn itself as a prison planet. We could then say that the purpose of the conduit is to transmit, to free and transmit that leadership to Earth, to the abyss within the Earth itself, and CERN acting as the gateway, the portal, to allow those entities to move from Saturn back to the Earth. Now, the slightly different version that I have of that is that Saturn is, and that's where you were starting to go, is that Saturn is in fact the abyss, rather than the abyss existing here on the planet Earth. Now, it's kind of semantics at this point, because this is what they believe. It isn't what I believe or you guys believe. We're just reflecting what we've been studying and hearing. I don't think that we're going to be here to observe this, to witness this, and to know how this really plays out. But if they believe that whoever is residing in Saturn is either the leadership or all of the entities that they wish to free up, it being the abyss itself, so be it. Their goal is to connect to Saturn and to unlock the doorway, a dimensional doorway between our two planets.
Yeah, that's, well, I don't know, Josh, you should, what do you think, Josh? I'm just sort of dumbfounded by the whole story, I suppose.
Yeah, I kind of am too. It's absolutely fascinating. I haven't done a whole lot of research into this area, just besides reading your work, Doug, and that of David Flynn. But as far as the actual Saturn connection, I'm basically with you and with the audience. I'm learning all this myself, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that Anthony, I don't know if you, I think you're probably like me. You don't necessarily subscribe to everything that you hear or read about or whatever, and this aspect of the electric universe model that talks about Saturn and the construction of the planets, the way they were aligned and all that. I mean, that there's some evidence for that. Once you take the leap and going to the point of saying, well, in fact, somehow Jehovah, the Lord God, gathered up all of the fallen angels and put them on the prison planet. Maybe that's a nod to Alex Jones. I don't know. And put them on Saturn and locked them away so that they could not come to Earth and bother us. There's lots of reasons to challenge that. I mean, there's, goodness knows, there have been ways to. People have been contacting demonic entities and Aleister Crowley and all that kind of stuff. It gets back to the notion of, what kind of technology, is CERN really, and why are they doing it, and are there voices whispering in their ear that, are voices that, goodness knows, 99.9% of the people at CERN probably have absolutely no idea that there could be a leadership that is behind this, that for some reason they're being guided or told or forced to create some kind of a bridge. Bridge too far, another pun. So it's it's one of those hypotheses that you cannot prove. It is merely fascinating to contemplate it, and the fact that I guess Francis Bacon himself said that there's nothing that's so foolish that some philosopher somewhere hasn't already said it. And that probably that may be that this is exactly like that. Nevertheless, it is this new theory of the electric universe, of which much of it we might thoroughly agree with. There is this sort of I guess you could call it an ideology, perhaps even a spiritual sort of religion behind it, that the folks that are, like a David Talbot and some of the others that are kind of the main proponents for the electronic universe, they may be sort of positing a kind of new spirituality that we may not subscribe to, but yet it's fascinating to understand and to learn from it to a point. And then it's also, of course, an area for those of us that are leaders and thought leaders in Christianity, and that we need to be discerning as well, and try to differentiate between what we think is probably true and what is just speculation, and some of it wild speculation.
Sure. You mentioned Crowley, and he was focused on Saturn as well, Aleister Crowley. So if you look at a lot of these occult societies, the hidden societies, you'll find at their core the worship of Saturn. And so we have to ask, why are they so fixated on it? And I think it stems back to this idea that Saturn and Earth were, joined together within the same plasma envelope.
Right.
Part of what they're trying to do, in addition to the connection utilizing Birkeland currents, as I describe as a plasma conduit, is to create that plasma envelope around Saturn again, because it's comprised primarily of gas, to reignite, if you will, and that's just a simplified way of saying it, but to create a plasma envelope around Saturn, also to terraform this planet, both the surface of the planet as well as the magnetosphere, by creating a plasma envelope around Earth again that would be identical to the plasma envelope around Saturn. They cannot bring the two planets together again physically in terms of a shared envelope of plasma, but they can create the plasma at both locations. And the purpose of the envelope here on this planet is for the new race of beings that Satan wants to create after killing God's creation. And that's why we see all the terraforming events taking place on this planet.
Well, that's of course an important aspect of the notion of Shiva, which of course I've heard you talk about on other shows, is that it's not just a god, a destroyer god, but it's a destruction with a purpose, which is a destruction that would recreate or terraform the planet for a new type of being. And of course this gets into transhumanism and the whole notion of the fact that Satan really doesn't want to help take us to the next level. He would rather just eliminate us altogether and create new creations to be housed on this planet.
That's correct. And so it can sound like I'm completely mad, and I perhaps might be completely certifiably insane here. But the point is, this is what these characters believe. It's not what I believe, and you've already said that.
Right.
I'm simply conveying what I have discovered through research. Let's talk just for a second about Saturn itself. Again, people probably are familiar with the photographs of the southern pole and the northern pole of Saturn. The southern pole of Saturn has a spiral that looks very much like the spiral that we saw over Norway.
Yeah.
At the northern pole, we see the hexagonal shape of contra-rotating energy clouds. That's a particle accelerator, if you want to call it naturally occurring or perhaps created by entities, whatever. But that northern pole of Saturn is a synchrotron particle accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much larger version of what is going on at CERN.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That synchrotron particle accelerator is generating Birkeland currents that travel through the core of Saturn and connect to the southern pole of Saturn. The purpose of that is, again, for the joining of the two planets. Two synchrotrons communicating through a plasma conduit. The physics exist. We have our machine here, and there's a machine at the northern pole of Saturn.
And the question is whether it is a naturally occurring phenomenon or was created long ago, or is being created again by whatever these forces are that might exist there. So, this it goes beyond speculation perhaps into crazy thinking, and yet these are things that are being discussed and talked about. Now, the notion of planets and sort of surprising elements of planets. I know Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra in their work on sort of the secret or the hidden history of NASA. They talk a lot about what is the red spot on Jupiter, and is in fact the red spot on Jupiter some sort of a warping of space-time. And Hoagland had done theories that you would find similar spots at the same sort of 19-degree point off of the equator on Neptune, Uranus, and you even have that sort of a hot spot, if you will, on the Earth, known as the volcanoes of Hawaii, specifically the Big Island. So there's this idea that somehow angular momentum, the mass of basically the mass of these rotating planets, that it somehow creates a warping of space-time, if you will. That they've talked about this, and this has been another idea that's been out there quite a lot. Certainly Farrell's talked about this, and so I'm wondering, have you seen this before? Is there any connection between that and the plasma universe, or sort of an alternative theory as to what that might be? I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're seeing, I believe, these spots. I think you're seeing that there's a naturally occurring or gathering of the plasma energy on the planet. It's much like the eye of a tornado or eye of a hurricane. And so these are rotating plasma fields, and these are generating torsion fields. And there's a lot of discussion about torsion fields distorting time. And you're just simply seeing that gathering of the plasma energy within that rotating planet, within that eye of the storm type of effect. What we see in the terms of hurricanes and tornadoes here on this planet is no different than what you're seeing on these other planets, but on a much larger scale. And we go out to an even larger scale and we look at galaxies and nebula in the cosmos. We're also seeing this gathering of plasma and this concentration of electrical forces pulling together that in the gravity model scientists want to call black holes. That's just a gathering of plasma, a concentration of it, and that's occurring on these large planets, and it occurs on our planet as well in the form of hurricanes and tornadoes.
Yeah, well, that's certainly been a fairly significant part. I haven't heard or haven't seen that Farrell talks yet in his books about the electric universe concept, the notion of Saturn and so forth, but he certainly has talked considerably amount about this issue of torsion physics, and that's a big element in his discussions, and I talk a bit about that as well. And the idea that all of reality is sort of in sort of a torsion spiral kind of configuration, and that whether you're talking about the DNA, the double helix of the DNA, and it's sort of spiraling, or you're talking about galaxies and they're spiraling, that there's sort of this natural tendency for reality to have a spiraling kind of effect or torsion kind of effect. So it's that has been in literature now for several decades, I guess. So that's not new, but it is nevertheless still an aspect of this notion of what is the nature of reality itself. So I don't know, Josh, what do you think?
It's absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, my mind is blown, and that's something that I've thought about for a while too. Is the cyclical nature of reality and how that all ties together and everything. How much time do we have? I know you guys are limited on time. How much time do you guys have left to be able to talk?
I had blocked that until about 2 or 2:15 my time, which is about 20 to 30 minutes from now. I don't know, how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I'm fine. Whatever you need.
Cool. Yeah, I'm totally free too. I made sure to leave some extra time just in case. Well, should we get into some viewer questions, and then after that maybe we can talk about the future project that I know, Doug, you wanted to touch
I wanted
on.
to mention that too. Yeah, that could be great. Yeah, let's do the questions. That sounds good.
Cool. Well, since for the audience, usually this one was a little unorthodox. Usually when I have a new guest on, I'll post something in the Sharpening Report Facebook group. So make sure to join, and you will have the chance to send in questions to future guests. Since I wanted this episode to be a surprise, I couldn't really do that. It was just kind of general questions, but I do want to take the first one because I have a feeling if I did say, Anthony Patch is going to be my guest, if you have any questions for him, what would you want to ask? And I have a feeling this would come up, and if I don't ask it, I fear my audience might be upset with me. So, but again, for the audience, go to the Sharpening Report Facebook group, join, and you will have the opportunity to send in questions for future guests. So, and feel free, I mean, if this is something that you totally just don't want to talk about, that's totally fine. But I got to at least ask. A little while ago, you actually you went dark for a while. You kind of dropped off the grid, and from that, there were a lot of things that were said. I mean, even things as far as that you had been killed, which obviously that's not true. But I think if you're willing to talk about it, the audience would probably want to know the whole story behind that.
Well, it's a great question because I happen to be sitting in my good friend Clyde Lewis's office, as you know, and Clyde Lewis was kind enough to invite me to 2 of his Ground Zero University events as a keynote speaker. In the second event, Clyde was in attendance with me, as he always is. We noticed 2 gentlemen sitting in the back of the room who were wearing suits and ties. The rest of us were in casual clothing, and the room was extremely warm. After 3 hours of discussion, these 2 gentlemen approached me in the parking lot as I was leaving. They didn't shake my hand or anything. They were polite otherwise, and they said, "We like what you're saying, but we'd like you to stop." And that was all they said, and they left. Now, this was following an increase in harassment in the form of electronic harassment on my websites, my 2 laptops, everything. I went on Facebook that evening and made the decision to discontinue what I was doing. It was very clear to me during my 3-hour presentation that they were disapproving of what I was saying. We were able to, following this event, pinpoint that it was my use of the name of the manufacturer of the adiabatic quantum computer that got me in trouble. I made the announcement on Facebook, pulled down my Facebook pages. My YouTube channel had been pulled down. Within 3 days of that taking place, all of the electronic harassment ceased, and they left me alone. About 4 months later, while I had gone dark, so to speak, I then had a conversation with Clyde Lewis about what happened, and he asked me to come on the air. And for the first time, he revealed to me and the public that he too had been approached in the parking lot after I had been. Yet one of the gentlemen shook his hand, and rather vigorously. Within about 20 minutes, Clyde was in the emergency room and was diagnosed with having been poisoned. We believe it was a poison transferred by the handshake. It was a pretty clear message. Now, he didn't tell me this when I went dark. It was after I had made the decision to come back into the public arena, and he revealed that incident. So the two of us, unfortunately, Clyde suffering more than me, but the two of us got the message not to use the manufacturer's name anymore. I have not really received any harassment other than interruptions to Skype interviews and things like that, which may be natural, they may be, purposeful, I don't know, but they've pretty much left me alone because I'm not using that specific name anymore. They're letting me run off at the mouth, if you will, with all of my hyperbole and hubris.
Wow, well, thank God that you guys are okay. I'm really glad that nothing more came out of that, and it seems like they're leaving you alone. That's good. All right. Well, I definitely wanted to ask that because I knew people would want to know, and the actual first question that we got from a viewer we touched on before. But I'll ask it anyway in case there was something that you wanted to add. Sonny wrote in, I read in Anthony Patch's addendum to one of his books how he mentioned CERN and the changing of the terra firma. He didn't elaborate, though. Does this have anything to do with the fallen angels being able to inhabit Earth? And we talked a little bit about that already, but do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, the terraforming that's taking place is specifically volcanic activity, earthquake activity, the tectonic activity, and the changing of the morphology or the shape of the magnetosphere. These are directly attributable to the actions of the Large Hadron Collider itself. It generates three principal forms or sources of magnetic lines of force that act, one as gravimetric waves, gravity waves that propagate through the mantle and the crust of the Earth. The other is that the magnetic lines of force are extending out into our magnetosphere and magnetopause that act as shields around the planet. So the machine has had a direct effect on what I call terraforming the planet. They're not trying to protect the planet from these changes. They're letting these changes take place. We've heard sounds due to telluric currents. Telluric currents or telluric waves occur naturally because the Earth acts much like a battery, a low voltage battery. It generates these currents, but the machine also generates telluric currents that we then hear as they are reflecting off the magnetosphere and the ionosphere and back to the Earth. So those strange sounds that people have been reporting are all attributable to that. When we look at Fukushima and the radiation that's been released and continuing to be released, the question is, why aren't they taking steps to stop that? Why are we seeing increases in hurricanes and the weather modification taking place? It's all purposeful. All of this is to change the planet, change the environment into an environment that is conducive to the new race of beings that they want to birth upon this planet. They don't care about us. You know that Georgia Guidestones indicates 500 million people. A number of things that we have seen that have said they want to reduce the population. We see that a third of the population will be killed according to biblical scripture. So the population reduction fits into this whole concept of terraforming for a new race of beings.
Wow.
Whoa. Yeah, wow. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Doug, on any of these, feel free to jump in. The questions are for both of you guys. Is there anything that you'd want to add to that?
Well, just that, again, we don't know exactly. We know sort of Scripture paints some broad brushstrokes as it relates to this whole issue of, the satanic conspiracy. I mean, the Bible at one level is absolutely the ultimate conspiracy book, because it tells us that there is this general conspiracy that God created the heavens and the earth, and they were created, perfect, and then something happened and corrupted that creation, and then, that's kind of known as the gap theory, the gap between a supposed gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, in which the world and the cosmos was somehow corrupted. And we don't necessarily know if that's all of the universe. Perhaps it is. We don't know if we've been cordoned off, some way. that we're just in our little solar system, kind of disconnected with the Oort cloud or whatever. But we don't know exactly how this fits into all of that. But we know that there's a giant conspiracy against the Lord God, the Creator, and that this second in command decided that he wished to become the Creator, and he felt that he was powerful enough that he could do it, and so he basically created an alternative plan, Plan B, if you will. And Plan B is what he is attempting to culminate in, perhaps in the time of our lives right now. And all the things that we've been talking about are, a very educated guess as to how this Plan B might come about, how it might achieve fruition. And the fact that it may involve planets within the solar system, and that there's little hints, scientific hints that we can discover in the nature of the planets and the moon and the craters and all these different things, that's just kind of part of the research that I think is permissible. What is it? The glory of God is to hide things, and I don't know if it's the dignity of man or whatever, kings is to search them out. I forget what the other word was, but in effect, we have that opportunity to do that research and to learn these things and discover these things, and I think it's in that spirit that we're having this conversation.
Right.
Yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree, and that's why I think having open discussions, and free exchange of thought like this is so important, especially with the state of the church nowadays. I mean, you're not going to walk into any church and be able to hear the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
No, not at all, not at all. We were joking the other day when we were not on the air. We were talking about, well, what do we call ourselves, and I said, well, I know it sounds like we're fringe, but really I call us biblical orthodoxy.
Yeah.
It's just that there's not many of us willing to have these conversations drawn based upon the worldview of the Bible.
True. One of the things that I've come to understand is that Satan's ultimate goal is to kill God, and he's trying to build an army along with weapons to kill God. And we didn't talk about this, but with the advancements in the agenda with the LHC, they were colliding ions of lead. The machine is shut down right now because they're going to be changing over to a new form of superconducting magnets. But
let me cut you off right there. Sorry, let me cut you off because I want to make sure to get this person's name, because that was actually the next question. So it's perfect. I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah. Todd asks, is there something special about collisions with gold ions? What is it and why? And then I'll add also the lead ions. So sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to make sure I gave credit to Todd for the question. So go ahead.
No, great question, Todd. I mean, this extends back to the Tablet of Hermes. This is understanding the relationship of 369. Tesla talks about that, but that's in the Tablet of Hermes. This goes to the practice of alchemy and the transmutation of elements, lead into gold. The machine is a machine for transmutation of the elements, whether we're talking about the production of Higgs boson or quarks or strangelets or whatever due to the collisions. These elements result, not elements, but these particles result from these collisions. They're not combining things, as you said, and correctly so. They're not combining in a blender and creating new elements or new isotopes, but they're realizing or being able to illuminate particles that already exist by fracturing particles down to a smaller size. The transmutation, the use of ions of lead, or if we're talking about the element of gold and protons being collided, is for the purpose of fracturing an element such as gold down to its quantum particles. It is for the discovery of new particles, and along with that, other dimensions. So there are other dimensions that result from the field effect, and you correctly described that earlier in our conversation. So we're looking at different waves, different frequencies, different dimensions that are realized by the collision of protons with the element of gold. And they've moved to collision of ions of lead because of the density and the center of mass energies that are realized from the collision of lead. And again, for the production of different frequencies, energies, particles, and then other dimensional aspects that are influenced by that release.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Doug?
Absolutely out of my depth here. So I was thinking of Laurel and Hardy, and Stan once said to Laurel, he said, "You can lead a horse to water, but a pencil must be lead."
Fair enough.
All right, that's it. I've embarrassed myself now.
That's okay.
All right.
James asks, do leading physicists have any theories on the origins of quantum fields? As far as I can, I'll just jump because I just have a real short thing. As far as the only thing that I've ever really heard a leading physicist talk about it was Sean Carroll was asked in the same presentation talked about earlier in a Q&A session afterwards. He was asked how string theory and quantum field theory how they would go together, or if they do at all, and he said he didn't have much of an answer besides he said, as basic, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically, as far as I can tell, if both are accurate, there should be a string field where all the other fields, would come from, because string theory says that fundamentally every particle is, like tiny vibrating strings. Quantum field theory says that all particles come out of their corresponding quantum fields. So for them to be able to be put together, there should be like a string field kind of thing. So that's the only thing that I've ever heard that kind of even comes close to that. What about you guys? Have you guys heard anything?
Well, Richard Feynman, he also theorized string theory, but in his later research, I think he was moving away from string theory. I think that the unifying theory that a lot of these guys are realizing, and again, I'm using my intuition more than I don't have a PhD in physics, so based on that, I think they're moving towards the realization that you described earlier, and that is that the particles and our frame of reference and our reality are nothing more than vibrations of energy. Yeah. And that energy really is the unifying theory. It's the slowing of energy that results in solid particles. It's the frequency of energy that results in not only energy but also the types of particles, be they quarks or muons or gluons or Higgs boson.
Yeah, I would just throw out that the problem that we get into is any kind of synonym that we come up with, whether it's time, energy, matter, plasma, that that we're sort of limited by our language. There is this sort of medium. In fact, I just sent you guys a selection out of this book that we're proposing that we do together about the ether and about this medium and so forth and what we choose to call it. But it's not purely energy, but it's somehow, whatever the medium is it congeals in some way, and it forms the substance that we commonly call matter. But we experience it as matter or we experience it as energy. But either way, it is still a congealing of this medium. And I happen to think that it kind of fits with the biblical worldview to call it time. I think that for me, I would distinguish between time as a scalar and time as a substance that is the in effect is the reality that we experience, but it exists outside of or inside of eternity, and but we're limited by language. Language is metaphoric by its very nature, so it means it's a picture of reality, and it's a picture that's useful to us, just like mathematics is a language, which we said at the outset. So we're limited to that.
Once we become spiritual entities and are freed from our human limitations, then we will be privy to that information as to what time is and what matter is.
Knowing will be direct. There's I kind of studied philosophy, and well, I don't have a degree in philosophy. My degree's in letters, but one of the sort of the mainstays of philosophy is Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, and Kant had talked about the way that we think, and he distinguished between transcendent knowledge and transcendental knowledge. And he talked about the thing as in itself and the thing as we perceive it. And we are limited, basically, according to Kant, we're limited to everything as we perceive it, because we're human subjects and we know through certain categories of knowing, which Kant talked about as quantity, quality, relationship, and modality, and that all knowledge fits into these 12 categories of knowing. And that was sort of the basis for modern philosophy. It was Kant who wrote this around 1800 or whatever.
Well, imagine,
yeah, go ahead.
No, but imagine point of reference, our frame of reference. If you go back into the 1800s, they never heard of quantum field theory.
Yeah, that's right.
Particle accelerator. So their frame of reference was different, philosophically speaking, as to what was matter and what was energy and what was spirit and what was physical form and what was time.
Right.
So
Now,
our reality today is being shaped by the technology, by the science. As we begin to understand more about quantum field theory, it begins to change our philosophical and our theological.
Yeah, again, it's. I think a language is a metaphor. It's a model, and I think what Kant was trying to say is that only God can know a thing in itself. Only God can know something as it truly is. We are limited to how we know things by how we sense them, how we smell them, taste them, touch them, feel them, think about them, and that all of those are subject to being finite creatures. Right. And so that's the Kantian distinction that he talks about, and we won't get into dualism and all that, but nevertheless, that kind of was the point I think you were making, is that as Paul, what does Paul says that we know today, sort of like looking in a mirror darkly, but then we shall know even as we are known, and that's kind of what he's getting to, is sort of trying to bridging the Kantian gap, if you will, once we are spiritual beings.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-blowing stuff, and it's interesting too, because there's one interpretation of wave-particle duality that kind of talks about that too, from the perspective of quantum field theory. This interpretation, and again, I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just this is what some physicists believe, is that, and for the audience, wave-particle duality is basically how a particle or a wave can act like a particle or a wave at the same, sometimes it acts like a wave, or sometimes it acts like a particle, and it's kind of, there's, like the name says, there's a duality there. But there's one interpretation of that says that, and I think this is pretty accurate, that what's happening is the reality of it is it's a wave. When we look at it, due to our limited perception, we see a particle, but the reality is the wave, and I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I
think the Beach Boys said it right. If you catch a wave, you're sitting on top of the world.
There you go.
Or one of their other good songs, "Good Vibrations."
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, we've now reduced philosophy and the electric universe to the Beach Boys. That is that's alchemy. That's genuine alchemy right there.
Puns abound. Oh man, all right. Where did we leave off? All right, Troy writes in, are there any good reasons to think there is actual supernatural practice? We talked about this too, but if you guys have anything to add, actual supernatural practices going on at CERN. I don't think the idols out front are proof, because those were gifts from member governments, not something CERN themselves built. Also, sorry to be so detailed here, but I also don't think them talking about other dimensions is proof either, because that is also still a theory, and there is no hard evidence other dimensions exist in physics. We talked a little bit about that, but if you guys have anything to add, feel free to jump right in.
Well, I'll start off just briefly by saying that they are motivated spiritually, and they are gaining knowledge spiritually, and that's what's driving this whole thing. And I'm not talking about the individual physicists and engineers there, but again, the leadership, those that are setting course for the technology and for the machine itself, they are the ones that are receiving the guidance spiritually. Again, you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical world because they are concurrent and they influence one another.
I would pose something we haven't really talked about, which is, is the notion of how many dimensions are there. Mathematically, dimensions are, to some extent, kind of a mathematical construct, and there's different theories. Certainly the popular sort of standard theory right now is that there's either 10 or 11 dimensions. Mm-hmm. The Einsteinian notion that we all kind of grew up with in school was that there were 3 physical dimensions and time itself was a 4th dimension. Farrell talks a lot about a guy named Nikolai Kozyrev, who was a Russian, I guess he was a theoretical physicist, like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. And Kozyrev postulated 6 dimensions. And so, in fact, using Big Bang, I think that there was a little inside joke that Sheldon and Leonard were talking, and Sheldon was bragging about how he'd figured out kind of the mathematics of the universe and his unified field theory, and Leonard goes, yeah, but it required 21 dimensions or something like that. So the fewer the dimensions, the more sophisticated and elegant the theory would be. So anyway, the point is that to argue that there's no other dimensions beyond, let's say, space-time is probably mathematically an ignorant statement to make. The real question is how many dimensions are there really, and really is hard to know because we're limited again to a mathematical model, and different, I guess, theoreticians have different models as to how many dimensions there are, but the common theory is about 10 or 11 right now. I don't know, Josh, you talk a bit about the number of dimensions, obviously, in quantum creation. You might have a comment on that whole issue as well.
Yeah, modern M theory says 11 space-time dimensions, so it'd be 10 of space and 1 of time. And I think, I don't know if it would count as a dimension, but I think that there might be a 12th sort of foundational dimension or zeroth dimension.
That's so biblically, numerologically symmetrical to say that because of 12 being such a great number in the Bible.
Yeah, that's another reason why I like it too, because it would fit in, biblically it'd fit in perfectly. But where I get that from, and I'm not the only, I didn't come up with this or anything. There are others that have come to this conclusion way before I even started thinking about it, but basically if you think of the first spatial dimension as a line in between 2 points, like the x-axis, then the 0th dimension would be the original point, just 1 point, without any any lines or any real dimensionality. So I don't know if it would really constitute a dimension. I use an illustration in my book Quantum Creation where I talk about how you can think of dimensions as kind of like a 10-story building, and every story is another spatial dimension. And in this 10-story building, there's an elevator shaft that runs along, up through all dimensions, and that's time. And then the concrete that the building is resting upon would be the 0th dimension. I don't know how accurate that is with reality as how God created it, but I think it's interesting at least, and it but admittedly speculative.
Can I give you my model of the universe?
Absolutely, please do.
It's in my companion book of science. I gave the beginnings of it, the hints of it, but in a nutshell, it goes back to my earlier discussion about the universe, our known universe, being in the shape of a sphere. But that sphere actually has a starting point. If we were to use the Big Bang as a beginning point, as a theory, and I don't entirely hold to the Big Bang, but use it as a point of reference. Buckminster Fuller. Most people are familiar with Buckminster Fuller because of buckyballs, fullerenes, C60 carbon, talking about geodesic domes. That's what he's most widely known for. He indicated in his research that he believed that the simplest geometric form that could enclose a volume would be a tetrahedron. Now, when I read that years ago, the light bulbs went off in the head. And I came to this conclusion. If we use the Big Bang as a starting point, the singularity at the beginning, before the explosion, was shaped in the form of a tetrahedron, like a pyramid, okay? And that the universe is comprised of tetrahedrons. I developed a computer model, a computer in my second book, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, a computer that is built, comprised of tetrahedrons that self-replicate, and once their replication is artificially stopped, purposefully stopped, they form a sphere. Inside that sphere are tetrahedrons. If you were to Google 600-cell tetrahedron, you would see exactly the epiphany that I had when I read the biography of Buckminster Fuller, where he said the tetrahedron was the smallest volume, or the shape of what could enclose the smallest volume. I believe that the universe, therefore, mathematically, if you go back to Tesla and the Hermetic beliefs, they believe in the numbers of 3, 6, 9, the ratios, the fractal patterns, all of that. You see 3, 6, 9 replicated in the tetrahedrons. I believe from a micro scale, quantum scale, out to the universe macro scale, everything takes on the shape of tetrahedrons. I believe you can create a quantum computer utilizing tetrahedrons. I came to that conclusion, and then about 2 years later ran across a study in 2012 from Columbia University in which they said you could arrange qubits, quantum bits, for a supercomputer, a quantum computer, in a configuration of qubits arranged as a tetrahedron.
Wow.
Absolutely blew my mind, because intuitively I said the universe is this, and therefore a computer can be in this form, this tetrahedral 600-cell shape. And when I read the scientific paper that said, yes, you can build a computer doing that, it absolutely confirmed my intuitive leap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
here's very prescient.
I want to keep the train of thought. Here's the last piece that I'll throw to you of evidence. About 4 months ago, I ran across another study that had to do with elements, and they were using high-powered microwaves to infer the shape at a quantum level, what the shape geometrically that elements took at various temperatures. They looked at gold and copper in this particular study. I'm shortening this down, but they showed that as the temperature increased, the elements took on more and more complex shapes of spherically arranged tetrahedrons at the quantum level.
Wow.
So you have the micro and you have the macro confirming, because even at the macro level, they have observed with telescopes tetrahedrons that make up the shape of many of the galaxies that they are now observing. They are seeing fullerenes, Buckminster fullerene arrangements of C60 carbon in tetrahedral arrangements on the macro scale of galaxies. Again, confirming my theory as to what the real model of the universe is.
Wow, and wouldn't that be perfect too for God to create it that way? Because we have a God who's in a sense 3 in 1, the Holy Trinity, and then we have the tetrahedron, which is 3 triangle, or we have a 3-sided shape, but in 3 dimensions, and it's just 3s all over it. That's amazing.
Yeah. Now there's something in terms of what we call natural theology or general revelation built into that structure, and I think Anthony, that's pretty brilliant. I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
See if we can build a computer.
Yeah, well, we may be behind the power curve on that one. Somebody else may have already done that.
Yeah.
So, Hey, Josh, I wanted to mention this project that we're working on together,
Yeah.
the three of us. Yeah.
And why don't we? I know you only got
Yeah.
a few minutes, so let's we'll conclude the viewer questions for now. But for the audience, again, the Sharpening Report Facebook group, go ahead and join. And when I have future guests on, you'll be able to ask. And I'm sure I'm going to have Anthony back on again.
Yeah.
And
Good.
yeah, absolutely, and of course Doug too. So you'll have the opportunity to ask questions specifically for them in the future. So again, for the audience, Sharpening Report Facebook group. So that is the end of the viewer questions. So yeah, Doug, I'm going to turn you loose. I want you to tell everything you want, and also mention the what you're working on now too.
Yeah, well, several things. One is that I just forwarded to you all that Josh, you might think would be good to post on your site along with this interview, which really gets into this whole issue. It's entitled "Is It Time for the Ether?" And we talk about a lot of these same issues from the research and writing I've done, and it might be useful to include as a link or a posting there.
Is this is it an article that you wrote?
Yeah, it's actually from the new project. I've written it previously, then rewritten it for. I proposed to you guys and a couple of other folks to put together a book with a working title, which I think is going to really stick, called Reality Revisited, and to target about May 1st or thereabouts for publishing a book that would be written by a number of us. I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 authors writing articles for it that really deal with this whole issue of the fact that kind of the conceptions of the cosmos that we were taught in school, and even those of us that had more advanced studies in physics and whatnot, that those things are even breaking down, and that we really need to revisit our notions of reality. Certainly the electric universe would be one, but it's not just those things. It's really our understanding of physics, our understanding of the kinds of realities and kinds of what the cosmos might have looked like 10,000 years ago, and was there a pre-Adamic race? Were there giants on the Earth? All of these kinds of things that are really shaking up the notion of reality that we have, that actually may fit perfectly into a biblical worldview. And so anyway, so that's something that we've agreed that we're all going to work on together, and so I'm excited about that. And so we'll see what we come up with. We think we'll have a mind-blowing book for folks to read, and hopefully it'll be something to be looking at by about the beginning to end of May, in that time frame. So I'm currently working. My normal life of writing is on geopolitics, and I'm working on a project right now called the Next Great War in the Middle East, and it's really dealing with American foreign policy, and then it flips over from sort of an analysis of the failures of American policy in the Middle East and our policy with Russia, to jump into the question of what is going to be the next great war in the Middle East. Is it the Gog and Magog war? Is it Psalm 83? Is the concept of the Islamic Antichrist the right idea? So I'm dealing with those kinds of issues because I think those are incredibly pertinent right now, given what's happening in the world. And I hope to have. I've already done some things. Probably as this program is aired, the book will be available on Amazon, and both a printed as well as an ebook should be available. And I will have done already several programs as well on it. And Josh, you and I'll have to do a program on it as well.
Absolutely.
So it's the next great war in the Middle East.
Fantastic. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. And so for those who might want to check out both of your guys, your work, your website, contact info, all that, where can they go to find you online?
Anthony, you first.
Pretty straightforward. AnthonyPatch.com. You can find my books there, and I post updates regarding CERN as well, and I also put my latest interviews from a variety of programs on there. So AnthonyPatch.com, and you can also use the contact tab. Send me questions if you like as well.
Great. For me, my website is faithhappens.com with a little hyphen in there, faith-happens.com. You can also just do a search on dougwoodward.com, and it'll direct you to that site. And then I also have a Facebook page, S. Douglas Woodward, that S as in Stephen, that I post to pretty regularly, articles and commentary on things that I see that pertain to predominantly these geopolitical issues that are so prevalent right now, and then lots of time you can find me out on YouTube, and I know Anthony, you're out on YouTube as well, so you can just do search on our names and find a lot of other interviews and videos that we've been a part of, and Anthony and I are becoming fast friends, and I'm hopeful we're going to in fact be on a panel together and at a conference later this next summer, and so we're excited about that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really cool. Yeah, people will have to keep up on you guys to check that out.
We're moving quickly now.
Yeah, absolutely.
At quantum speed.
Yeah, there you go. So I know we talked about a lot of different things. This has been such a mind-blowing discussion, at least for me. But if you had to leave the audience with a final thought, what would you want most for both of you guys? What would you guys want the audience to take away most from this episode?
Well, I'm not as eloquent as Douglas, so I'll throw in my 2 cents real briefly, and that is, we're not about fear. We're about faith. And we are doing all of this research for the glory of God and for Jesus Christ. And I just ask that people turn to Christ, because the evidence is in front of us that Satan's at work. You can see it in the machine. That's the evidence that there's a darkness over the world. And therefore, you have a choice. You can go to the light or you can go to the dark. To remove the fear and to ensure the integrity of your soul for all of eternity, I recommend that you turn to Jesus Christ.
Amen. Just a couple of real simple thoughts, because I think that there is so much that is mind-blowing, and some of this can be very fearful, and a couple little songs come to my mind, and I think that we have to come back to. One is, he's got the whole world in his hands. And we try to understand what that world is like, and we don't fully understand it, but we strive to know and to learn and to know more. But ultimately, God's got the whole world in his hands, including us, just like that lyric says, he's got you and me, brother, in his hands. So I think that's important. That one of the great theologians of the 20th century was a guy named Karl Barth, B-A-R-T-H, and somebody got up in the audience once when he was lecturing and said, Professor Barth, this is also mind-boggling. I can't understand it. Can you simplify this for me? And he just said, yes. He started singing in German, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And it's important. We got to keep it. Ultimately, it gets back to the fact that God is protecting us. God is our security, and Christ is the cosmic Christ. Everything in the universe, ultimately, Paul says, Jesus Christ undergirds it all, and he is the most fundamental of all realities.
Amen. I couldn't agree with you more, and that's a very beautiful and truthful statement to end on. Guys, I cannot thank you enough for joining me in this 100th episode of the Sharpening Report. It has been such a blessing and honor to talk to you both, and we're definitely going to have to have you guys on again in the future.
We'll do it. Sounds great. We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and also I want to extend another big thanks to Clyde Lewis for letting Anthony use his studio and allowing this to happen, because I'm not sure if we would have been able. Well, actually, we know that we wouldn't have been able to to do the episode without his help, because we tried, and we.
Well, I want to say thanks to Clyde as well, because he's the one who really, I think, is the pivotal individual in bringing me to the public arena, to the public venue.
That's great. We're gifted because of that.
Yeah, Clyde has a phenomenal show. He has a huge audience, huge following. He's extremely brilliant. So I think I will always be indebted to him for reaching out to me. He's a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, yeah. And so a big thanks to Clyde for all that, for doing his show, because I mean, it's not like we talked about earlier, this stuff can be dangerous. I would ask the audience to keep us all in prayer. Definitely Doug and Anthony, Clyde, myself, and our families, because the things that we research and look into, there are people out there that don't want us doing that, and it has dangers attached. So
knowledge is power, and
yes.
they would like to keep us ignorant.
Yep.
Absolutely. So for the audience, please keep us all in prayer for protection. And if you haven't done so already, check out Clyde Lewis's show, Ground Zero. You can find it at groundzeromedia.org. All right, guys. Well, hang on the line. I'll close this out here. Again, I can't thank you enough. We absolutely will do this again sometime. I think this is going to be a phenomenal show that the audience is going to love. And what a great way to conclude the 100 episodes of the Sharpening Report.
You'll do another 100.
That's it. I'm sure you will, unless the Lord intervenes.
Amen. All right, hang on the line. I'll close this out here. All right, for the audience, this concludes the 100th episode of the Sharpening Report. I cannot thank you all for listening and watching at home. I can't thank you enough. And for the continued prayer and support, and for continuing to do so in the coming weeks. My family and I are moving to Missouri to join the amazing team at Skywatch TV, and Tom Horn actually spilled the beans on Skywatch TV about some of the projects that we're going to be involved in. So if you want a synopsis of what the coming months is going to look like, go to Skywatch TV and check that out. Mind-blowing stuff. I can't wait. Now, this doesn't mean that the Sharpening Report is ending or anything like that, not by any means. I'm going to take a short break to get settled in and everything, but once we do that, the Sharpening Report will be back with episode 101, bigger and better than ever. In the meantime, if you'd like to find more episodes of the Sharpening Report, you can do so at ministudyministry.com and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Josh Peck Disclosure. Make sure to subscribe and share. I will still be doing daily videos even during the move and everything, so you can keep up on that. And all the videos are also at ministudyministry.com. And if you wish to or care to help support us, you can do that at ministudyministry.com, and your donations go to the everyday running of the ministry and help bring you more episodes of the Sharpening Report, as well as more books and other materials. And as I say in every episode, I will say again, please only donate if you feel God leading you to do so. It's not an obligation. If you're not sure, or if you don't know if you're feeling led, or if you just don't feel led, you can always pray for us. We can always use more prayer. We're not 501c3, not that we're against it, we're just not. So your donations are not tax deductible, and I'm never going to be the kind of person that's going to offer or promise extra blessings from God or a tenfold return on your money or anything like that. We're not in the business of making promises for God, but what I can promise is that your help, be it prayer or financial, is greatly appreciated, keeps us going, and is the only reason we're able to continue doing what we do. All right, so again, I really can't thank all of you at home for joining us in this 100-episode journey. I'm truly blessed and honored to have such an amazing audience for the show. Even though the show is taking a short break, as I said before, I'm still going to be doing daily videos, writing blogs. I'm going to be staying accessible, so feel free to write me anytime through email or Facebook. My email is joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com, and you can find me on Facebook easy enough. All my information is at ministudyministry.com. So again, thank you all so much. As always and forever, to each and every one of you watching or listening at home, take care and God bless.